The solicitor's office smelled like old paper and damp wood, the kind of scent that clung to your clothes like guilt. Rain tapped gently against the mullioned windows, soft but persistent. Sarah blinked at the yellowed envelope in her hand, her name written in thick, trembling ink. "From your great-aunt Maud," the solicitor had said, his voice clipped and disinterested. "You're her only living relative, apparently. She left you Bramble Hollow Cottage, somewhere in Wiltshire." Sarah looked up, her brow furrowing. "I didn't even know I had a great-aunt Maud." The solicitor shrugged, already gathering papers into a leather satchel. "Most don't until they die." The envelope felt strangely warm, despite the chill in the room. Her fingers trembled as she broke the wax seal, revealing a single sheet of folded stationery and a hand-drawn map. The writing was nearly illegible, like someone had written it under duress or with shaking hands. "My dearest Sarah, you don't know me, but I have known you all your life. I have watched from afar. I write to you only now because I must. The hollow is yours now. Be wary of the woods behind the cottage. Do not go out after dusk. Do not speak to the man with no eyes. Burn this letter once you've read it. With love and regret, Maud Tilling." Sarah exhaled sharply. A prank? A sick joke from someone in her family tree? She turned the map over. Hand-drawn. A line twisting through what appeared to be dense woods. Bramble Hollow was circled in red, and beneath it, scrawled hastily, "He watches from the trees." The drive to Wiltshire was long, grey and uneventful. She didn't know why she went. Maybe it was the way her life in London had unravelled, her job lost in a round of layoffs, her ex now living with a yoga instructor in Brighton, and the flat she could no longer afford. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was something else. Bramble Hollow Cottage sat at the end of a dirt road, where the trees leaned in like suspicious old men. The structure was older than she expected, stone walls laced with ivy, a chimney spitting lazy curls of smoke. Someone had lit a fire recently, but no one had lived here in months. The key fit the door easily. Inside, the air was stale, but not cold. Dust coated every surface, but the hearth was warm. A fire, still alive in the grate. That was the first moment she felt it. That subtle shift in the air, like the house was holding its breath. She dropped her bag and walked into the sitting room. It was just as she expected. Doilies, floral wallpaper peeling at the corners, framed portraits of stern people with clouded eyes. One photo, however, stood out. A girl, maybe 10, standing beside a massive oak tree. Her eyes were red, not from crying, but unnaturally so, almost glowing in the photograph. She was barefoot. A tall shadow behind her, man-shaped but indistinct, loomed in the background. Sarah felt her chest tighten. Old photography tricks, she whispered to herself. That night she heard the creak of the back porch. She was in bed, the covers pulled high, a book forgotten on her chest. The sound was distinct, wood bending under weight. Not a gust of wind, not a stray animal. Someone, or something, was on the porch. She slipped out of bed and crept toward the window. The curtain fluttered slightly, though the window was shut. Below, on the porch, stood a figure. Not a man, not exactly. He was tall, too tall, with arms that reached down near his knees. He wore what looked like a tattered coat, long and wet. His head was cocked at an unnatural angle, as though trying to listen. She couldn't see his face, only that where his eyes should have been there was nothing. Just dark, sunken pits. Her breath fogged the glass. The figure raised a hand, long fingers twitching like dead twigs, and pointed toward the woods behind the cottage. Then he turned and disappeared into the trees. In the morning, she found small footprints in the mud outside the back door. Not adult, not animal, child-sized, barefoot. She followed them across the grass, through the overgrown garden, and into the edge of the woods. The air changed there. The birds were silent. The wind didn't stir the branches. It was like stepping into a vacuum. She turned back, but the footprints didn't. They continued deeper into the trees, eventually vanishing into moss. That afternoon she found the second letter. It was tucked into a hidden compartment beneath the floorboards in the bedroom, as if placed there for her to discover only when she was ready. He will come to you now. That much is certain. He is not the devil, but older than the stories. You may see him only in the corner of your eye. Do not speak his name. Do not answer if he knocks. The hollow listens, Sarah. You must learn to be silent, or he will learn your voice. Maud Sarah stared at the words, mouth dry. Something was wrong here, not ghosts, not madness, something worse. That night, as the fire crackled low, she heard breathing, not hers. A slow, rasping draw of air like dry leaves being inhaled. It was coming from inside the walls, behind the fireplace, beneath the floorboards. Then came the tapping. From underneath the floor, 3 slow knocks, then a pause, 3 more, then a voice, low, wet and wrong. "You're in my house." Sarah didn't sleep that night. She sat upright in the creaking bed, staring into the dark, ears straining for every sound the old cottage offered up. The voice she had heard, "You're in my house," was not imagined. It was too close, too wet and real, as though someone with ruined lungs had whispered through the floorboards. But when she pulled up the rug in the morning, there were no cracks, just old wood, grey with time. Still, she couldn't bring herself to walk barefoot anymore. The fire had gone cold. The cottage seemed to breathe now, groaning with age, shifting its bones. She needed answers. The nearest village, Tillingham, was about 2 miles down a winding road flanked by bramble and hedgerow. Its centre consisted of a grocer's, a crumbling post office, and a pub that looked older than both. The sign above the door read "The Black Antler," with an image of a horned deer and flames. Inside, it smelled like smoke and earth. There were only 2 men drinking quietly at a corner table, and an older woman behind the bar. Sarah approached, forcing a polite smile. "Hi, I just moved into Bramble Hollow." The woman's hand stopped mid-polish on a pint glass. Her eyes, pale and watery, flicked up to meet Sarah's. "Maud's place?" "Yes." A long pause. The woman looked to the 2 men. One of them mumbled, "Bloody hell," and downed his drink. Sarah's smile faltered. "I'm just trying to get a bit of history. The place is strange." "You don't say," the woman muttered, then leaned forward. "You'll want to speak to Elsie Carter. She's the oldest soul in this village. Lives just past the church, the white house with the yellow shutters." The bartender hesitated, then added, "But if you've any sense, you won't go asking about the hollow. Let sleeping devils lie." Elsie Carter greeted Sarah from a worn armchair, wrapped in a plaid shawl and surrounded by dozens of clocks. They ticked out of sync, a chorus of warped time. She studied Sarah for a long time before speaking. "I always knew someone would come back to that house. Should have burned it down when we had the chance." Sarah sat across from her. "I don't understand. What's wrong with the place?" Elsie narrowed her eyes. "You've heard him already, haven't you?" A chill ran through Sarah. "The man with no eyes." "Not a man," Elsie said softly. "Not anymore. Maybe never was." In 1904, a family moved into Bramble Hollow Cottage. William and Margaret Gray with their twin children, Francis and Claire. They were quiet people, according to the record books, kept to themselves. But strange reports began to surface within months. Margaret speaking of voices in the woods, William becoming increasingly paranoid. Villagers claimed the twins were seen wandering deep into the forest, barefoot and expressionless, long after dark. One night in late autumn, the house caught fire. Only Margaret survived, dragged from the house babbling incoherently about a watcher in the trees. She died in an asylum 3 weeks later. The twins were never found, nor was William. The ruins stood silent for over 40 years until Maud Tilling bought it in 1949. She didn't believe in ghosts, Elsie murmured. She believed in rules. She knew how to keep the hollow quiet, curtains shut before dusk, a fire always burning, never speak its name, and never ever follow the footprints. Sarah swallowed hard. "Why not?" Elsie looked her dead in the eyes. "Because they don't lead you to him, dear. They lead him to you." Sarah returned to Bramble Hollow with a growing knot in her stomach. The cottage felt colder. The air tasted metallic. She lit the fire and sat down with Maud's letters, spreading them out on the floor like puzzle pieces. One caught her eye, a sketch of the forest path behind the cottage. It showed symbols carved into trees, a crooked fence half buried under ivy, and a phrase in the margin. "The whispering oak is the door. Knock once, knock twice, never a third." She shivered and flipped the page. There was something else beneath the ink, like a faded watermark. She held the paper up to the firelight. It was a handprint. Too large to be hers, smeared with what looked like old blood. That night she woke to the sound of a child laughing outside her window. Not gleeful, not playful, thin, tired, empty. She stepped to the glass and pulled back the curtain. Standing in the middle of the overgrown lawn was a girl, maybe 10, pale, drenched. The same girl from the photograph, barefoot, staring. Next to her, barely visible through the trees, was the tall figure, unmoving, watching, and behind him, hundreds of tree trunks carved with hundreds of handprints, as if others had tried to claw their way out of the hollow. Sarah's voice caught in her throat. She closed the curtain and backed away from the window. She never heard the door open. But when she turned around, muddy footprints trailed across the floor, leading to her bed. Sarah stood frozen in the center of the room, the fire crackling behind her like a distant heartbeat. The muddy footprints led from the door to the foot of her bed and simply stopped. No smudge of a turn, no sign of retreat. Just the imprint of bare, soaking feet pressed into the floorboards. She didn't scream, didn't move. Not until the flames behind her hissed, as though something wet had brushed against them and flickered low. That broke her paralysis. She ran. Out the door, into the cold night air, barefoot like the girl outside. The wind bit her skin like needles. The forest loomed, darker than before, as if it had drawn closer. She didn't stop until she reached the boundary of brambles behind the house. The girl was gone, the watcher gone, but the prints were still there in the grass, leading into the woods. Sarah stood at the edge for a long time, until her breath came slow again. Then she whispered to no one, "What do you want from me?" A wind curled through the trees, and it almost answered, "To be remembered." The next morning, Sarah returned to the map in Maud's letters, the one with the symbols and the phrase about the whispering oak. She traced the path with her finger, memorizing the pattern of forks and bends. There was something she hadn't seen before, a circle drawn deep in the woods, marked with an eye and 3 dots above it. Underneath, Maud had written, "Buried under ash and bone. The ritual began here. It ends here." The forest seemed different in daylight, less hostile but not less haunted. Sarah followed the sketch closely. The trees bore faint carvings, some weathered, nearly smooth by time. At first they seemed like normal symbols, runes perhaps, but as she stared longer the patterns shifted subtly. One set of lines became a face, contorted in silent terror. Another, a hand reaching upward. She found the whispering oak around midday. It was a gnarled, ancient thing, taller than the rest, its bark blackened as though charred. Beneath its hollow trunk, the earth was disturbed, old digging covered poorly. Sarah hesitated, then she knocked, once. The wind picked up. She knocked again. The wind died completely. She held her hand back from knocking a third time. Something told her not to. That last knock would cross a line. Instead, she crouched and began to dig with her hands. The dirt was soft, damp, and only a few inches down, her fingers hit something hard. Wood. She cleared away more and uncovered a small, rotting box bound with twine and coated in pitch. She pulled it out and opened it. Inside was a faded cloth doll, its face torn away, wrapped around a bundle of bones the size of a child's forearm. There was also a note scrawled in frantic pen. "Keep the fire lit. Keep the windows shut. Never knock 3 times. Never say his name. He is not death. He is what comes after." Sarah burned the box. She didn't know if it was the right thing to do, but it felt necessary. That night, the cottage screamed. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the fire cracking wood. It was the structure itself, groaning, wailing like a trapped animal in its death throes. She huddled near the hearth, whispering to the empty room, "I'm not like them. I want to help." The lights flickered. From the corner of her eye, she saw the shadows gather into a figure. Long, thin, wearing nothing but blackness and antlers made of splintered bone. It didn't move, just watched. Then, for the first time, it spoke. Its voice was like rot beneath floorboards. "You broke the seal." Sarah clutched the letters. "What do you want?" The thing tilted its head. "New names, new memories. The old ones rot. You remember now, you opened the door." Then it vanished, like smoke pulled through a crack, and the fire died again. Sleep never came. The fire remained cold, and Sarah spent the long night reading the rest of Maud's letters by the light of a flickering candle. The handwriting grew worse as the years went on, shaky, erratic. Some words were scratched out violently, as if Maud had tried to silence her own memories. One letter stood out. It was dated just a week before Maud's death. "Sarah, if you've come this far, then the blood called you home. I never had the courage to burn it all. I thought I could contain him. I was wrong. The Watcher is not a ghost, not a man. He was born from the rot in Bramble Hollow, from the silence of things that should have been said. He doesn't kill for hunger, he kills for memory, for worship. They used to give him names, now they give him blood. I stopped giving him anything. That's when the dreams came, the knocking, the fire going cold. You can still stop it, you can still seal him, but you'll have to remember the truth of what happened in 1912 and what your great-grandfather did beneath the ash tree. Ask the old man in the village. He's the only one who still speaks of the reckoning. Sarah circled the last line with her finger. The reckoning. She remembered the librarian in town mentioning it in a hushed voice, like a curse. The old man. There was only one person Maud could have meant. Arthur Bray. Arthur lived at the edge of the village in a crumbling stone house guarded by iron fences and the stench of dried herbs. When Sarah knocked at the gate, the old man was already there, standing like he had been waiting decades for her. "You look like her," he said, without asking who she was. "Same stubborn eyes." "I'm Maud's niece," Sarah replied. "She told me you knew about the reckoning." Arthur's eyes narrowed, and his hands trembled as he pulled open the gate. "You best come in then," he said, "before something sees you." Inside Arthur's house was a museum of protection, rows of dried herbs, mirrors nailed to every door, and candles burned down to pools of wax. He didn't speak for a long time, just poured them both tea and stared into the hearth. Then he said, "Your great-grandfather, Edward Marlowe, was one of the 6. Sarah frowned. "6," Arthur nodded. "The 6 that built the seal, the 6 that summoned him," he explained in a voice low and burdened by years. In 1912, the Hollow had a sickness, crops failing, people vanishing. Edward and the others thought they could bargain with whatever was under the earth. They found it, or it found them, and they made a pact. In exchange for prosperity, they gave it memory. "Memory?" Sarah asked. "Names, lives, secrets, the things we hide. They fed it confessions first, then animals, then people." He looked at her, and for the first time his eyes shimmered with real fear. Maud was the last to offer it anything. After her it grew restless. It began showing itself, first in dreams, then in the shadows. "You burning the doll? That was the vessel. You undid the last binding." Sarah felt sick. "So how do I fix it?" Arthur sighed. "You don't fix the Watcher. You put it to sleep, the same way they did, with blood, with truth." "What kind of truth?" Arthur leaned forward, lowering his voice to a whisper. "You have to go to the well." That night Sarah returned to the woods with a lantern, a shovel, and Maud's last letter in her coat pocket. The well was deeper than she remembered. It sat in a clearing where the trees bent away from it, as if recoiling. The air around it was too still, soundless. She peered into the black and whispered, "I know your name." No answer. She lit a match and dropped it in. As it fell, the flame caught something white moving in the dark. Then a voice hissed up from the void. "Say it again." Sarah trembled. "Edward, Maud, Arthur, me. We're the ones that remember." The wind rose violently, but she held her ground. "You're not forgotten," she said, "but I won't feed you." The well groaned, and a hand, skeletal, long, inhuman, reached up from the darkness. Sarah stumbled back from the well as the thing's hand reached upward, bony, blackened with rot, the skin stretched thin like parchment over sharp joints. It paused just above the stone rim, twitching slightly, as if unsure whether the world beyond still belonged to it. Then it receded. Not down, sideways, like it melted into the stone and disappeared, leaving nothing but silence in its wake. Sarah stood alone in the clearing, her breath ragged, her limbs refusing to move. Only the lantern's thin glow reminded her she was still anchored in the world of the living. Back at the cottage, the air had changed. It smelled of burnt paper and damp soil. Every mirror had cracked. The iron nails above the door were rusted through. And on the kitchen table sat something that hadn't been there before. A doll. Not the one she'd burned. This one was newer. Its face stitched in a mockery of her own. Same brown eyes, same scar on the cheek. Pinned to its chest was a yellowed note. All debt must be settled. The offering was incomplete. Arthur wouldn't answer his door. She found it ajar, swinging in the wind. Inside, cold ashes in the hearth, a spilled cup of tea, and nothing else. No blood, no struggle, just gone. Like he had been plucked from the world. His chair was still warm. On the floor near it was a torn scrap of paper. She picked it up and read in his trembling scrawl, "If it comes to this, the ash tree must be opened, the heart must be broken again." That night, the dreams returned, stronger, crueler. She was standing in the woods, barefoot, her feet sinking into the black mud. Figures surrounded her, 6 of them, cloaked in burlap, wearing the faces of her family. Maud, Edward, even her own mother who died when Sarah was 6. They chanted words she didn't know. The well was gone. In its place stood the ash tree, its bark peeled like skin, its roots writhed like worms, and hanging from one of its limbs was her doll, the one from the kitchen table. She woke screaming. The cottage was no longer safe. She left at dawn, carrying only the lantern, the shovel, and a bottle of salt water blessed by the village priest, though even he hadn't dared to ask why. The ash tree stood deep in the woods, beyond the old boundary stones. It was massive, ancient, its trunk scarred with carvings, runes, names, dates. At its base lay the remnants of old offerings, jars of blood now dried, bones etched with symbols, and the decayed remnants of other dolls. Sarah dug. The soil fought her, turned to stone, then to clay, then to something black and wet and alive. But she kept going, her hands blistered, her breath raw, and then the shovel struck wood. A door, a rotting trapdoor buried beneath the tree. With a final cry, she pried it open and descended. The chamber beneath was impossibly large. The ceiling arched high like a cathedral, roots dripping from it like chandeliers. In the centre was a stone altar stained dark and old. Around it, 6 sets of initials were carved into the floor. She found Edward's and Maud's, and then her own, freshly carved. That's when she heard it. Footsteps, not walking, crawling, clicking nails on stone, and then breath, right behind her ear. You were always meant to remember. She turned. He was there, the Watcher. His face was no face, only suggestion. Eyes where there should be none, skin that shimmered like oil, his limbs long, too long, arms that folded like knives. Sarah stood her ground. You feed on memory, she said. The Watcher moved closer, circling her like a predator. Not feed, bind. You want us to remember the sins, she said, to relive them, that's the bargain. He tilted his head. And you, what will you give? Sarah looked down at the altar. She pulled the doll from her coat pocket and laid it down. And then she reached into her bag and removed a small glass jar. Inside, a tooth, her own. The one she had pulled after her last dream, when she woke with her mouth bleeding. She'd known, somehow, that something physical had to be offered. Something personal, something with pain. She placed the jar beside the doll. The chamber trembled. The Watcher screamed, not with voice, but with the sound of dead leaves and twisting metal. The roots above flailed and then fell still. The ground closed itself. Sarah stood alone in silence. And then it was over, or so she thought. Back in the cottage, she cleaned the broken mirrors and lit every candle. The air was warm, safe. That night, she slept. For the first time in weeks, there were no dreams. But in the morning, she found a package on her doorstep, wrapped in black cloth. Inside, a single photograph, taken from high above, an aerial view of Bramble Hollow. Except there was no ash tree. There never had been, just a perfect circular patch of scorched earth. And in the center of that circle, a figure, standing still, watching the sky. Sarah stared at the photograph, her fingers trembling. The sky outside her window had begun to darken, though it was barely past noon. Over the hills to the north, a wall of clouds was building, impossibly tall and strangely motionless, like they were watching. She returned to the photograph. The figure at the center of the scorched circle, it looked like her. Not her now, but her, 10 years ago. The same jacket she'd worn when she first left home, the same red scarf she lost in the woods near the mill. She flipped the photo over. A message was scrawled in the same shaky hand Arthur had written in before he vanished. You broke the chain. That's good. But the Hollow remembers what it was promised. Sarah tried to leave. She packed a single suitcase, locked the doors, took the old road that cut south through Harker's field, past the crumbled bridge and toward the highway. But with every turn, every step, every blinking light on the dashboard, the landscape began to distort. Not drastically, subtly. A mailbox where none should be. A road sign she'd seen 20 minutes ago appearing again. The radio repeating the same half-second of static, endlessly. She pulled over. The clock in her car read 3:14 p.m. She waited. 20 minutes passed. Still 3:14 p.m. The Hollow wasn't letting her go. Back at the cottage, the wind had stopped. The forest outside was silent, not just quiet, but silenced. No birds, no bugs, not even leaves moving. Sarah lit every candle she had and sat by the window, the photograph resting on her lap. Then, a knock. 3 soft taps. She approached the door. No one. Only a book. Her grandfather's old journal, the one she'd buried with him. It was damp, the leather cracking. She opened it slowly. The pages were different now. They had changed. The journal now told a story. Not his story. Hers. Everything she had seen, done, felt, from the burning doll to the ash tree, to the altar beneath the roots, even the tooth in the jar. It was all there, word for word. The final page, written in deep red ink. To end it fully, you must go back, to where it first saw you, where you first heard it call. A map was drawn beside it. It didn't point to the well. It pointed to the chapel ruins on the other side of Bramble Hollow. A place no one spoke of. A place the forest swallowed long ago. That night she dreamed again, but it was no nightmare. She stood in a pew, candlelight flickering above her. The chapel was intact, beautiful, covered in ivy and moss. The watcher stood at the altar, his face obscured in shadow, whispering words into the mouth of a child. The child turned. It was Sarah, and she was crying. She woke before dawn, took only what she needed, the lantern, the journal, and the photograph. The walk to the chapel took hours. The forest had grown thicker, wronger. Trees bent in unnatural ways, vines swaying when there was no wind. She could hear her name whispered from the moss. Once she passed a deer, motionless, upright, eyes white, as though carved from bone. She reached the ruins as the sun broke the horizon. What had once been a chapel was now only fragments. A collapsed wall, broken beams, and an archway still standing. And in front of the archway, a hole. Not dug, torn, as if something had clawed its way up. Sarah knelt beside it. She whispered the name her grandfather had taught her when she was 5. Tharniel, the wind answered. And from the hole, a voice echoed, her own, but distant and younger. We made a vow. She descended. Stone turned to root, root turned to bone. At the bottom was a chamber even larger than the one beneath the ash tree, and in its centre, floating, was a figure bound by threads of light. Her. The version of her that had stood in the circle, the one who had made the bargain. She stepped forward. The figure opened its eyes and spoke in unison with her own voice. I offered what they needed. You tried to undo it. You broke the chain, but the debt remains. Sarah touched the floating version of herself, and in a blink, she remembered everything. The accident when she was 7, how her sister fell into the well, how she was the only one who saw what reached out to pull her under. How the Watcher had appeared to her in the days after, whispering that her sister wasn't gone, just changed. How she had offered to forget, in exchange for silence, peace, safety. A vow sealed in blood and memory. That was the bargain. And now that she had remembered, the bargain was broken, and the Watcher had returned. Sarah stood in the void. All around her, pieces of memory floated, moments she'd erased. The pain, the fear, the strange deaths in the village. Every oddity that had been hidden from her. You can't unsee it, the Watcher said. Then I won't, Sarah replied. And she let it all in. The chamber cracked, the bindings shattered. The other version of Sarah dissolved into light, and the Watcher screamed, a terrible sound like glass snapping inside the skull. She climbed out of the pit as the chapel trembled. She stood in the morning light, breathing hard, and the hollow was quiet, not silenced, just still. The balance restored. Weeks later, Sarah left Bramble Hollow. She didn't say goodbye. She moved to the coast, found a job at a small bookstore, never spoke of what happened. But sometimes she'd see reflections out of the corner of her eye, her own face watching her from places it shouldn't be, or hear footsteps behind her on empty streets. And always, in her dreams, the chapel. Whole again, waiting.